Hello, everyone. Welcome to Little Planet. I'm Manolo, co-host of this,
That's Josh Riley. I'm Eva.
and we're here today with Helen and Marie, co-founders of Climate Education for Illinois. You want to tell us a little bit about how it started and why you started it?
Sure. I guess I can start. My name is Marika Villa, and I am one of the co-founders of Climate Education for Illinois. I live in Evanston and started working in schools through our district for a while in climate action efforts, and then I realized that we really needed this education to reach a lot more students than it was already reaching, since Evanston's a pretty progressive place, and we want to make sure that kids all over got climate education. So then I was lucky enough to be paired up with Helen, and I'll let her introduce herself.
So, hi, I'm Helen von den Steinen. Thanks for having us on your podcast today. I moved to the US in 2016 from Germany, where I'd spent most of my adult life. And to be honest, was a little bit shocked when it came to sustainability, something I'd taken for granted. Living in Europe was very different in the US. And through my work, I've worked in global innovation for over 30 years, worked on consumer goods and talked to so many people about sustainability, done a lot of research in that area, and really am convinced that education is the key. We need to educate our kids while they're young. They take that back to their families, they bring that to the communities, and that's how we make a big difference in sustainability. And so I was also lucky enough to discover Marie and team up with her and a whole group of other people. Marie and I co-founded the group Climate Education for Illinois, but we very quickly found a lot of other like-minded people who have coalesced together to really take action on climate education.
So, who are like your partners in this fight?
Wow, so many. Yeah, we went through a lot of networking. We discovered that there were students from Naperville High School who were actually learning in their civics class to write a bill. And so, I would say we supported them, though we never really were in very close contact as they were doing this at all. But they're, I would say one of the main people to really give kudos to. And then beyond that, certainly we've been working with, specifically, It's Our Future from 7 Generations Ahead. And then as time has passed, I would say that was kind of like the first wave of support. And then once the bill was passed, and now we're working with additional partners, including environmental educators for Illinois. No, I'm sorry.
Environmental Educators Association of Illinois.
Illinois, thank you. Of course, we are in contact with SubjectToClimate, which is a group that was created by teachers that has championed climate education hubs in other states. And those hubs are basically websites that have teacher-created resources that are aligned with the state standards so that education can be place-based and therefore relevant for students.
I think as I look at, as zoom out, I think, Marie, you did a good job of covering the Illinois-based people. As we started out on this journey, we wanted to make sure that we didn't just reinvent the wheel. And so we talked to a lot of people in many different states that were very helpful. Some of them were way ahead on their journey on climate education versus where we are. So we were able to learn a lot from them. Notably, New Jersey, that was the first state that managed to introduce climate education across all grades and all subjects. But we've also talked to people in New York, Maine, Connecticut, Wisconsin. But we talked to a lot of people outside of our state as well to really understand what best practices were. And that was actually how we came across SubjectToClimate, because we discovered that they'd created state hubs for several other states before Illinois started their work. Yeah.
I had a follow up to that one. Can you talk a little bit about what Subject to Climate is and what they do, and like how do they come up with all those resources? Because I've looked at their site and there's so many and it's insane.
Yeah.
Who makes them?
Yeah. So SubjectToClimate is a nonprofit founded by educators who are also passionate about climate education. And what they do is they create these state education hubs, or in fact, they have a general climate education hub. What they do is they get a variety of different resources. They vet them by both a scientist and a teacher before they put them on their website. If it's a state hub, they'll align those with the state standards, and they also sort them by subject and by grade. And then one thing that's super important, because there are so many resources out there, it's not that teachers are lacking in resources, it's that they're lacking in resources that are ready for them to use. And so what they do is they work with teachers, and they actually have teachers who are on the working committee to take those resources and turn those into what I call teacher-ready resources. So they create learning plans. They make sure that the content really is right-sized to fit in the class. So they really are working with educators who understand what kids need to make sure that educators are really empowered to teach about this, not just another website that has a ton of information that you have to spend hours sorting through, but they've really done a good job of curating it and getting it ready for teachers to use. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I certainly the momentum from all the other states, and in addition, we worked at that point with the IEC, the Illinois Environmental Council. We worked specifically with reps that were already supporting the Naperville Students Bill. We learned a lot. Personally, I learned a lot about civics that I did not know. So, yes. So I think it was a learning experience for all involved. So, we networked and put the call out for people to sign witness lists. And I know Manolo and I traveled to Springfield, and we made phone calls and talked to reps and worked the inside outside game. And amazingly, even though we were told that most of these bills took years to pass, easily 3 years and such from our communications with other states, this was passed in a year. So I think we were very lucky.
I think as well, we have a great community within CE for IL. We have almost 150 people now on our mailing list, and we were able to mobilize them to call their representatives, to post things on social media, to file witness slips for the different bills. So that they were also a critical part of this work.
How have you thought of how CJA is which is the Clean and Equitable Jobs Act, which was passed in Illinois back in 2020, I believe. Look it up for yourself, don't quote me. But are we making sure that CJA is represented in the resources that Subject to Climate and we make?
Yeah.
I think CJA is really important because that is creating the jobs that the youth of today are going to be filling. And so that's another critical reason why climate education is so important, because a lot of these are new jobs in new areas, and youth need to be prepared for these and know about these jobs. And so preparation for jobs, in particular those created by CJA, are a really critical part of what we're doing.
And why it's so important for it to be regional too. For example, Subject to Climate has a general hub, but the general hub would not address the fact that we're lucky enough in Illinois to have progressive laws that have led to the creation of these opportunities. That is not the case at every state. So yes, we're certainly trying to emphasize the opportunities created by CJA.
Keep people informed. I know you guys have a mailing list.
Yeah, so we have our mailing list. Right now, we're not sending out as many mails. We also have some old school social media by the name of Facebook. We also are trying to dabble in Instagram, and would welcome any sort of youth involvement in that, and guidance, I should say. And I would say that we also, aside from that, we have involved students that have gone to table at their schools. Some of our members from 7 Generations Ahead and It's Our Future have gone out to table. There's actually a tabling happening this weekend at a teachers conference. We have participated in webinars by other environmental associations. So those are kind of the means, I would say.
How do people join? Because I know there's like 3 different committees, and you're looking for a position to be filled. Can you explain more and say all the many ways people can get involved?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So for the actual hub creation, there are 3 different types of roles. An important one we're recruiting for right now is the state lead. That is a job that requires about 10 hours a week. We're looking for an educator. They can be a retired educator, and it is a paid position. And they will really coordinate a lot of the working committee. So we're recruiting for that right now. We also have a working committee, which has, I believe, 8 teachers or educators of various kinds on it who are working under that state lead. We still have 1 or 2 positions there to fill as well. And that is, I believe, a total 10-hour commitment over several months with some stipends associated with it. And then there is an advisory committee, which is a broader group of people who are not necessarily educators, but people that are bringing content and have some education perspective as well. That advisory committee is already formed and we've met twice already. Although we always welcome more people if you want to participate in that. That requires a monthly meeting and is a voluntary role. So they're the key ways you can get involved directly in the hub. I mean, other ways, though, that people in general can get involved is to donate. We need money to create this hub. We're creating materials that will be free for teachers to use, but in order to do the creation and pay these various roles, we need to do some fundraising. And so we have a link on our website where you can donate. And last but not least, we need people to help spread the word, as Marie said. I'd say our social media skills aren't the best, but we're looking for people to really spread the word amongst their networks and their friends and post things on their social media to make them both aware of climate education for Illinois. So hopefully we get some more people that donate or give us grants to do this work, or, just teachers to make them aware that the hub's available when it is available so they can start to use the resources.
So what are your future fundraising ideas? Are you going to get involved with communities and stuff?
And future goals maybe too.
Future goals too, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say on the fundraising side, we really have a 2-pronged approach. So we have our, call it grassroots fundraising, which are things like the fundraising event that we're doing at Skokie, the donations. We had an end of year giving campaign where people, we sent that out through our network of family and friends. So that's kind of the grassroots community fundraising. And then we are also approaching various philanthropic organizations, family foundations, and so on, applying for grants through different organizations to get some funding. So for example, we were able to get one grant through, I think it was Constellation Energy, that will fund teachers in Will and Grundy County of Illinois to do some of this lesson planning and professional development. So it's really a multi-pronged approach. That said, we are complete amateurs at this fundraising side of things, so we're making it up as we go along. We welcome any suggestions or help people have. So if you know of anyone that could potentially donate or give us funding or foundations that offer grants, please put us in contact with them, because really warm introductions are the way that we need to go on this.
How would people get in touch with you on that front?
They can go through our website or our email, and our website is climateeducationforillinois.org.
.org.
.org. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, as far as future goals, certainly not just to get the hub up and running, but really to create a additional awareness of educators so that they know that those resources are there. Not yet, but will be there hopefully by the beginning of next school year. And so to create more ties with educators outside of the Chicagoland area, and ideally also to get more involvement from higher ed educators, those who really are teaching teachers how to be teachers, so that they bring this knowledge with them and are ready to go once they're in the classroom.
Yeah. And another thing, we have had some initial discussions with ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education, and I would say they're very positive and supportive of what we're doing. And nothing's cast in stone yet, but we've talked about how we want to make sure that our hub is linked into their central hub and resources, so that when teachers go to their regular platform for resources, they will get directed to the SubjectToClimate Illinois Climate Education Hub. So we're not creating too many different pathways for teachers to access the material. And I do think, as Marie mentioned, educating the educators is an important part of it. And so we do have a list of all the different teacher training institutes throughout the state, and we're going to be reaching out to them as our hub gets more evolved to make them aware and of what's going on, so they can use those resources.
You guys have a curriculum built up for them, or an example to give them to make it more seamless to integrate? these types of things?
Yeah. So in Illinois, curriculum is owned by the school district. The state board does not mandate curriculum. It works on standards. And so our state education hub will be aligned with the standards. That said, we will have developed teaching plans for teachers. So they will have materials that they can already take and use. And there are already many examples of those on the main Subject Climate hub. If you go to, I think it's SubjectToClimate.org, if you click on there, you can see their general hub. And then they also have some examples of state-specific hubs like New Jersey that show things align with different standards.
I'm glad we're doing this because I remember when I was in middle school, like, there's definitely been times where, like, I'd do chemistry, right? And I didn't really get to learn the fundamentals because even though they were teaching me great things about the environment, it overtook curriculum. So the fact that you have these plans and these templates to give these educators, it's a godsend because that means that you can learn the real world applications of it without it overtaking things that are like essential for things like chemistry, biology, all this stuff.
Right. You raised such an important point because that was one of our key learnings as we started out on this journey was teachers are so overwhelmed and there's no extra time for them to teach extra subjects. And so they don't want to be told you have to teach a unit of climate education, right? That was one of the initial bill proposals was that they would have to teach a unit. And they're like, well, we don't have time for a unit. And also we are convinced at Climate Education for Illinois that climate is a lens through which everything should be taught. It's not a separate subject. It's not just about science and social science. It really should be baked into everything because it affects all aspects of our life. And so what I love is the way Subject Climate really is across all different subjects. So for example, if kids are learning about plotting data in math, then they could take data that's specific to do with solar energy production across the state. And they could look at that, right? So they're learning about sustainability and renewable energy at the same time as learning those basics that you talked about, right? That they need to learn as well.
If you know how to incorporate something, it's a lot easier to do it. And like you said, if teachers don't have enough time, they don't have enough time. It doesn't matter what anyone thinks. You know, they gotta teach those kids as much as possible with as little of a time frame as they can. So like, you know, I've seen this gradual progression of proper integration of these environmental things. Like for instance, like biology, I don't know if they do this at the high school, middle school level, but like when we're talking about Punnett squares now, the pepper moth gets brought up, which has been affected by climate change. You know, their whole population is, and they paints an example of like, you know, how we as humans, how sometimes our waste and our inefficient energy and all this can lead to drastic changes in the environment. It gives a prime example that's undeniable. There's a lot of other ones, like if you go and look out for them. I don't know if it was PFAs or something else, like those kind of ended up in the water and, you know, wiped out a big portion of like bird populations. And so like all these examples really go and show like how important it is to go out there and like protect what little of the earth we have left and nurture it. So I'm really happy that you guys are on a mission to do that because it does make a difference. You know, if you do a job well, then no one's going to argue against it is the hope. And I think what you guys are doing here is great.
I was just going to say that, you know, I would say that priorities for us in terms of how this education is framed is that it's certainly solutions based and age appropriate as well, so that younger students may not necessarily be, you know, learning deeper truths that they're not ready for. Rather, they're really learning how to love the environment around them. So we're hoping that this leads to things like outdoor education, and it can be as simple as, regardless of, you know, if you're doing your reading lesson, just doing it outside. If you have to do observations, to do them outside, that alone I think will inherently be good for the health, but also for the learning that will ultimately drive that sense of protection, awareness, and desire to protect in the future, hopefully.
It's definitely important to get that outdoor education too, because like that's something that there's not a lot of in the classrooms in general. Like, you know, as a college student, I'm spending most of my time indoors doing things on paper that, like, in all honesty, I could learn more about through getting outside and trying some of these things, like collecting samples from outside, in like a biology classroom. That would be great. There's a bunch of organic chemistry that really plays on that type of stuff. And I think, just going outside in general is really good for mental health. And there's a whole bunch of talk about how, like, people in school have more mental health issues and it can feel kind of depressing. And I
Yeah.
think that would really help with that kind of collage of places.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And in my early education classes, I was learning about how to construct a classroom, and kids, and I'm sure you guys know this, but learn a lot better when they're surrounded by nature and there's like more naturalistic elements, colors in the classroom. So, I'm really excited about that.
They actually did a recent experiment in China. I saw in New Scientist last week. They painted a woodland scene, the entirety of a classroom, including painting the sky above them, and did a comparison between two different classes and how well they learned in those two different environments. And even just painting it, faking it, made an impact.
Oh, I love
So you
that.
can only imagine what being outside actually does. I have to find that example, send it to you, Marie.
Yeah, I love that.
That's cool.
Otherwise, at the very least, one can take on plant husbandry, which
Yeah.
I got a bunch of plants, but I can't really show you any. None are in my room. They're just outside on some windows, so it's not good to get a light here. But no, it definitely helps.
What do you?
Yeah.
What?
Is that dark
Yeah.
at all?
Well, we all ditto that definitely, right, guys? Can other states form things like this? How do other states get involved in creating a hub, or you just created a website, right? And then got connected with them. So what's your best path, would you say, to get a
I think
state?
organically, like we did, we started listening to webinars, and then from there to jotting down names of people that were involved, and then contacting those people, and then those people made us contact more people. So I think
Yeah.
important thing is to have the motivation, and yeah, I mean, we'd be happy to learn at least what we've learned, as others have been so generous to do with us, to share their experiences, and hope that this expands to other places.
I'd say one thing that was helpful was, I think it's the Green Schools had written a report specifically around
Center for Green Schools.
bills that have been, the Center for Green Schools, around bills that have been passed in different states, and they'd kind of put together a current best approach. And that was super helpful because that had some basics for us to structure our bill around in the first place. There's a lot of material out there, but I do think it comes down to just connecting to people. And I think how we've been successful at creating such a large coalition and getting all this information is we weren't scared to just contact people that we didn't know and ask them. That's so important. Not everybody will say yes, but the more people you ask, the more information you're going to get. And so anybody in the same position, I'd say, don't be afraid. Just contact people, contact them via LinkedIn, contact them through your friends, contact them through social media, because in my experience, everybody working in this space is more than happy to share. They have the same mission that they want our youth to be educated about climate, regardless of which state they're in, and they're all willing to help if you ask them.
Or through paddle sessions, because Helen is very, very successful at contacting people through paddle session.
Paddle tennis, yeah, through my paddle network. I use every network I have. And the other thing as well, I know, at least for me and somewhat for Marie, is you don't have to be an expert. Neither of us had worked at getting legislation through. And I have limited experience of the US education system because I moved here only a few years ago. And, we could have seen that as a barrier, but instead what we did was we took the skills that we had and used those and surrounded ourselves by other people that could help us with the skill sets we needed. So for example, Illinois Environmental Council was really instrumental in training us on how to get this bill through and helping us with how those systems worked. We've had various teachers and people at ISB that have helped us better understand this education system and how it works. So I'd say anybody in that same position, don't be afraid. Just get going with what you have and then find the other people in your network that can help you.
I think that's a great lesson for everyone.
Mushrooms are trees also talk to each other.
Yep,
Oh,
they
it's
talk
rice.
under
Yes, yes.
That's so
The
cool.
World Wide Web.
Yeah.
World Wide Web. No. Wood wide web or
The
something.
Wood Wide Web, yeah.
A web of mycelium, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, a big lesson has been Venn diagram that Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson always talks about,
Yeah.
which is, what you should do should be a combination of the work that needs doing, what skills you have, and what brings you joy. And I think that, for us, kind of making connections, at least I can speak for myself, that has is always kind of therapeutic for me. I think finding other people who are also enthused to roll up their sleeves and do something about this. And so I think that everybody can kind of put on their thinking caps and figure out where that Venn diagram lies for them.
Say you're in the middle of it right now.
Well,
You're
let's just
always in
say
the middle.
there are certainly areas that challenge the work that I enjoy doing. But for example, necessarily the tech stuff. And poor Ellen certainly does more than her share there. Fortunately, we have other people who is a graphic designer, is one of our good friends and supporters as well. And so we try and rely on each other whenever we see that something is kind of outside of our element.
I would say we're in the middle. And I would say this work brings me a lot of joy, both in terms of the mission and the progress we've made and the great people I've met along the way. It's also expanded my network of people I know, which has been a lot of fun. So it's not just been work, it's been fun for me as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having a conversation with us. Very
Sure.
glad you took out the time. Is there
Thank you.
anything you would like to tell anyone? Anything you would like to support, to shout out before we end the call?
Share, like, donate.
And just the fact that we appreciate the work that you guys are doing. And I personally am always struck by the whole injustice of the climate crisis situation, the fact that this younger generation oftentimes is saddled with so much, and we certainly want to do everything that we can to support your generation in rolling up our sleeves and finding the opportunities in this challenge. So thank you
Definitely.
guys.
Yes.
Everything that was mentioned, including some of the chart Marie mentioned by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and the link tree will be in the show notes of this
Fantastic.
episode. So thank you all for coming on.
Thank you.